Hey, family. Welcome to Mr. Gray Family, where every story begins with us. The room was filled with urgency. Soft footsteps moved quickly across polished floors. Machines beeped in steady rhythm. A nurse adjusted something near the bed, while another gave quiet instructions that blended into the tension hanging in the air. Lucas stood still, completely still, not because he didn't know what to do, but because, for the first time in his life, nothing he had built, planned, or controlled could prepare him for this moment. His eyes were locked in one direction. Zara. She lay there, exhausted, yet calm in a way he didn't understand. In her arms, wrapped carefully, gently, was the child. His child, the very thing he had spent months preparing for, the very thing he believed would finally give his life meaning. And yet, something felt different, something he couldn't explain. The doctor said something, a nurse smiled, someone congratulated him. Lucas didn't respond, because the only thing he could see was the way Zara held the baby, not like someone completing an agreement, not like someone finishing a responsibility, but like it mattered deeply. The child made a small sound, barely noticeable to anyone else in the room, but Lucas heard it, and something inside him shifted, not in a loud, overwhelming way, but in a quiet, undeniable way that settled deep in his chest. He took a step closer, slow, careful, as if moving too fast would somehow change what he was feeling. His gaze moved from the child to Zara. Their eyes met, and in that moment, there was no contract, no arrangement, no boundaries, just a silence filled with questions neither of them had prepared for. Zara studied him, not with confusion, not with expectation, but with awareness, because she felt it too, that this moment wasn't as simple as it was supposed to be. Lucas opened his mouth slightly, closed it, then finally said, quietly, "This wasn't supposed to happen." The words didn't sound like a complaint. They didn't sound like regret. They sounded like realization, a realization that everything he thought he wanted had just become something far more complicated. Zara didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him, holding the child a little closer, and somehow, without a single word being added, everything between them changed. The silence in the room didn't last long, but the feeling it created stayed. Lucas stepped back slightly, running his hand across his face as if trying to regain control of something that no longer followed his rules. This was not how he planned it, not how it was supposed to feel. Everything had been structured, defined, clear. A child. That was the goal. Nothing more, nothing complicated, nothing emotional. And yet, standing there, watching Zara with the baby, he felt something that didn't fit into any plan he had ever created. Zara shifted slightly, adjusting her hold on the child. Her voice was soft, but direct. "Lucas." He looked at her, not guarded, not distant, just present. "This is where things go back to normal, right?" she asked. There it was, the question both of them had been avoiding, the line that separated what this was supposed to be from what it was becoming. Lucas didn't answer immediately. For a man who always had the right words, this time they didn't come easily, because the truth wasn't simple, and it wasn't safe, but it was real. He took a slow breath, then said it, "I don't think I want normal anymore." Zara's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. A slight shift in her eyes, a pause in her breathing, because she understood exactly what that meant. And for the first time since this journey began, nothing felt controlled, nothing felt predictable, and somehow, that made everything more real than ever. Welcome to Mr. Gray Family, a storytelling universe built for people who crave meaning, emotion, and unforgettable narratives. Here, every story begins with a spark, and ends with a feeling you'll carry long after the video ends. Love, betrayal, family, secrets, lessons. It's all here, wrapped in immersive narration that makes you forget everything else. If you're searching for stories that pull your heart, challenge your mind, and keep you coming back, subscribe now. Your story begins the moment you choose to stay. A billionaire who had everything, except someone to call family. Have you ever built a life so perfect it started to feel empty? Because that's exactly what happened to Lucas. He mastered success, controlled outcomes, built an empire that most people could only dream of. But when the noise faded, when the meetings ended, when the doors closed, there was nothing waiting for him. No one, so he made a decision. A calculated one, a controlled one. He would have a child, not through love, not through chance, but through a process designed to remove uncertainty. And that's where Zara came in, grounded, warm, completely different from the world Lucas lived in. She wasn't looking for money. She was looking for meaning, and stepping into his life seemed like a way to find it. But what happens when two people from completely different worlds enter an agreement that was never meant to involve emotions and end up creating something neither of them planned? Before we go further, do me a quick favor, like this video and drop a comment. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Because this isn't just a story about a child, it's a story about control, about connection, and about what happens when life gives you something far more powerful than what you asked for. Before any of this happened, before the hospital, the child, and the moment that changed everything, there was silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that lingers too long, the kind that makes you aware of every second passing. Lucas stood inside his penthouse, staring out over Baton Rouge. The Mississippi River stretched across the distance, reflecting the fading evening light. Cars moved steadily below. Somewhere in the city, people were finishing dinners, laughing, talking, living. Up here, there was none of that, just space, perfectly arranged, perfectly untouched. He loosened his tie with one hand, slow and automatic, like a habit repeated too many times to think about. His jacket followed, placed neatly over the back of a chair that no one else had ever used. Everything in the room had a place, and everything stayed exactly where it belonged, always. He walked toward the kitchen, clean, unused, the kind of kitchen that looked impressive, but never told a story. No open containers, no dishes in the sink, no sign that anyone actually lived there. Lucas poured himself a drink, 1 cube of ice, measured, controlled. The glass clinked softly as he set it down. That sound, it echoed longer than it should have. He picked up the glass and moved toward the window again. Same position, same view, same routine, every single evening. For a man who built his life on growth, expansion, and forward movement, his personal life had become a loop. Wake up, work, meetings, decisions, return home, silence, repeat. Lucas took a slow sip, his eyes scanning the city below without really focusing on anything specific. People moved in groups. Couples crossed the street together. A man laughed as someone beside him nudged his shoulder. Small moments, ordinary, but not his. He leaned one hand against the glass, cool, still, unchanging. There was a time when this life felt right, necessary. Every decision he made had a purpose. Every sacrifice had a return. While others spent time building relationships, Lucas built leverage. While others invested in people, he invested in outcomes, and it worked better than he expected. At 39, he had more than most people would achieve in a lifetime. Influence, access, control. Control, that word had defined everything. Nothing happened in his world without structure, without planning, without a reason. And yet, standing there, looking out at a city full of lives he wasn't part of, a question surfaced, not loudly, not urgently, but consistently. What is all of this for? He didn't say it out loud, but the thought didn't leave. It returned the next night, and the night after that, always at the same time, always in the same place. Lucas turned away from the window and walked into the living area. The furniture was expensive, sharp lines, neutral tones, everything chosen with intention. And still, it felt like a place designed to be seen, not lived in. He sat down briefly, then stood up again. Restlessness, not physical, internal. There was no one to call, no one to check on, no one waiting for him to say anything at all. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Another business message. Another deal moving forward. Another confirmation that everything was working. He turned the screen off without replying, because for the first time, success didn't feel like enough. Lucas walked back to the window one more time. Same view, same city, same life. But now, The silence felt heavier. Morning came early, not because Lucas had to wake up, but because he always did. 6 a.m., no alarm, no hesitation, just routine. By 7:30, he was already seated inside a glass-walled conference room overlooking Baton Rouge. The skyline reflected against the polished table, blending the outside world with the one he controlled inside. 3 people sat across from him, documents open, laptops ready, waiting. Lucas didn't waste time. "Walk me through the numbers again," he said, calm but firm. One of them nodded quickly, flipping to the right page. Revenue increased by 18% this quarter. Distribution expansion in the southern region exceeded projections. Lucas raised a hand slightly, not aggressive, just precise. Margins. The room adjusted instantly. Everything around him responded to his presence, his tone, his expectations, his silence. This was his world, predictable, structured, efficient. By midday, he had already approved 2 major contracts, declined one proposal without needing explanation, and rescheduled a meeting that didn't meet his standards. No wasted time, no unnecessary conversations. Everything moved forward, and yet, between those moments, there were gaps. Small ones, easy to ignore, but they were there, like when the meeting ended and everyone stood up. One of the men glanced at his phone and smiled. "Sorry, my wife's been texting me all morning," he said casually. "I promised I'd call her during lunch." Lucas gave a short nod. "Take your time." The man left quickly. Still smiling, Lucas remained seated, looking at the empty chair across from him. For a brief moment, the room felt different. Then it passed, and he moved on. Later that evening, he found himself at a business partner's home. A backyard gathering. Nothing formal. Just people. Music played softly from a speaker near the patio. Someone stood by the grill, laughing as he turned over food that had clearly been flipped too many times. Children ran across the yard, their footsteps uneven, their voices louder than necessary. Lucas stood near the edge of it all, holding a drink, observing, not uncomfortable, just separate. "Lucas," someone called out. He turned. A man approached him, smiling. "You made it. Thought you'd cancel." "I said I'd be here," Lucas replied. The man nodded, then gestured toward the yard. "Relax a little. This isn't a boardroom." Lucas gave a small acknowledgement, but relaxing wasn't something he did easily. A child ran past him suddenly, nearly bumping into his arm. "Hey, watch it," a voice called from behind. A woman stepped forward, placing a hand on the child's shoulder. "Say sorry." The child looked up. "Sorry." Lucas nodded once. "It's fine." The woman smiled politely before guiding the child back toward the others. Lucas watched them go. The interaction was simple, quick, but something about it stayed with him. Laughter broke out near the table. A group of people leaned in toward each other, talking over one another, interrupting, reacting. No structure, no order, and yet it worked. Lucas took a sip from his glass, eyes scanning the scene again. No one here was thinking about contracts, or margins, or outcomes. They were just there. He stayed for a while, long enough to be present, not long enough to feel part of it. That night, the city felt quieter than usual, or maybe he just noticed it more. A few days later, he received a call, short, direct, unexpected, an acquaintance, someone he had known professionally, around his age, gone. The memorial was held in a modest space, nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress. Lucas sat in the second row, still, composed. One by one, people stood up to speak. Not about business, not about success. They talked about moments, shared experiences, time spent together. A woman spoke about how he never missed a family dinner. Another mentioned late-night conversations that lasted for hours. Someone else laughed quietly while recalling a small, personal memory that meant nothing to anyone else, but everything to them. Lucas listened, without expression, but inside, something shifted, because none of the things being remembered had anything to do with what he had spent his life building. No one mentioned numbers, no one mentioned achievements, no one mentioned status. Only connection, only presence, only people. Lucas sat there, hands resting together, his gaze fixed ahead. And one thought settled in, clear, unavoidable. If I were gone tomorrow. He didn't finish the sentence, because he already knew the answer, and for the first time, that realization didn't feel distant. It felt immediate. The days after the memorial didn't return to normal. They couldn't, because something had already shifted. Lucas still showed up to meetings, still made decisions, still maintained the same level of precision that built his life. But underneath it, there was resistance, not to the work, but to the silence that followed it. One morning, he sat in his office, reviewing a proposal that would have once held his full attention. Numbers, projections, expansion timelines. He read the same line twice, then a third time. Nothing registered. Lucas leaned back slightly, exhaling in a way that wasn't about exhaustion. It was something else, something unfamiliar. He closed the file, not because it was complete, but because for the first time, it didn't feel urgent. That was new, and he didn't ignore it. Instead of calling the next meeting, he canceled the rest of his day. No explanation, no rescheduling, just a pause. Back in his penthouse, the silence greeted him again. But this time, he didn't distract himself from it. He walked past the kitchen, past the living area, straight to the window. Same view, same city, same life. But now, he stayed there longer. Minutes passed, then more, and instead of pushing the thought away, he allowed it. What is all of this for? This time, the question didn't fade. It expanded. All the years, all the focus, all the control. What had it built outside of business? Lucas ran a hand across his jaw slowly, thinking, not strategically, not analytically. Honestly, he didn't want a relationship. That much was clear. He had tried that before. It never lasted, not because of the other person, but because of him. Too structured, too unavailable, too focused on outcomes instead of moments. That wasn't going to change overnight, and he knew it. But the feeling that something was missing, that wasn't going away either. So he approached it the only way he knew how, with clarity. If he didn't want unpredictability, if he didn't want emotional complications, if he didn't want to depend on something he couldn't control, then there had to be another way. That was when the idea formed, slow at first, then sharper. A child, not as an accident, not as a result of a relationship, but as a decision. Someone to come home to, someone who would exist beyond contracts and outcomes, someone who would make everything else mean something. Lucas didn't rush it. He stood there, letting the idea settle, testing it, challenging it. But it held. For the first time since the memorial, the question in his mind had an answer. And once he reached that point, he moved. The research started that same day. Legal frameworks, medical procedures, requirements, timelines, every detail mattered. He wasn't going to approach this emotionally. He was going to approach it correctly. The process had structure, guidelines, protection. That made sense to him. Surrogacy. It removed uncertainty, defined expectations, created a clear path from decision to outcome. Lucas read through profiles, backgrounds, medical histories. Everything was filtered, organized, evaluated, exactly how he preferred it. But even in the middle of all that structure, there was one element he couldn't fully measure. The person, not just qualifications, not just compatibility, but presence. He paused at one point, scrolling through information that felt complete on paper. And still, something told him this decision wasn't going to be as controlled as he thought. He ignored that thought, because logic had always worked for him, and this was no different. Or at least, that's what he believed. Across the city, in a completely different environment, a different life was moving at a different pace, not structured, not controlled, but full, and that was where Zara existed. She didn't know Lucas, she didn't know his world, but soon, she would become part of it, and nothing about either of their lives would remain the same. Across Baton Rouge, life moved differently, not quiet, not controlled, but full. Zara stepped out onto the front porch, just as laughter broke out behind her. "You're leaving already?" A voice called from inside. She turned slightly, smiling. "I said I'd be back tomorrow," she replied. "That's not the same thing," another voice added, followed by a light chorus of agreement. Inside, the house was alive, not in a chaotic way, but in a way that felt real. Voices overlapped. Someone was arguing about music. Someone else insisted the food needed more seasoning. A chair scraped lightly across the floor as someone moved too quickly without paying attention. Zara stepped back in for a moment, leaning against the doorway. "You all act like I'm disappearing," she said. A woman waved a hand dismissively. "You disappear for 2 days, and suddenly we don't hear from you. That's a problem." Zara laughed. "It's called having a life." "Your life is right here," someone replied instantly. That made her pause. Not long, just enough to feel it, because in many ways, that was true. Her world wasn't built on silence. It was built on presence. Weekends looked like this: food shared without invitation, conversations that stretched without structure, people showing up without needing a reason. Zara moved toward the kitchen, grabbing a plate that had already been prepared for her. "You didn't have to do this," she said. A voice responded from across the room. "We always do." She nodded, taking a bite as she leaned against the counter. The taste was familiar, comforting. Everything here had a rhythm, not planned, but understood. And yet, even in the middle of all that, Zara had her own thoughts. Later that evening, she stepped outside again, this time alone. The street was quieter now, not empty, but settled. She sat down on the steps, resting her elbows lightly on her knees. From inside, laughter continued, muted, distant. Zara looked ahead, her expression shifting slightly, because as much as she valued everything around her, there was a question she hadn't fully answered yet. Not about money, not about comfort, but about purpose. She had built a life filled with people, connection, moments, but something inside her kept asking, what more could she do? Not for herself, for someone else. That thought had been there for a while, quiet, persistent. It wasn't about leaving her world. It was about expanding it. A few days later, that thought returned. This time through conversation. Zara sat across from a friend, listening casually at first. "I'm serious," the friend said. Some women actually choose to do it, not just for money, but because they want to help someone. Zara raised an eyebrow slightly. "Help how?" The friend leaned forward. "Surrogacy." Zara didn't respond immediately. She just listened. "They carry a child for someone who can't," the friend continued. "Some of them say it's one of the most meaningful things they've ever done." That word stayed with her. Meaningful. Zara looked down briefly. Processing. "Is it really that simple?" she asked. "It's not simple," the friend replied, "but it's real." That conversation ended like any other. No dramatic moment, no immediate decision, but the idea didn't leave. That night, Zara sat in her room, scrolling through information. Not quickly, not impulsively, carefully. Requirements, process, responsibilities. Everything was laid out clearly, and the more she read, the more one question formed. Could she do this? Not physically. That wasn't what she focused on. Emotionally, could she carry something that mattered so much to someone else? Could she step into a role that required trust, discipline, and strength? Zara set her phone down slowly. This wasn't about opportunity. It was about impact. And for the first time, she felt like she had found something that aligned with the question she had been asking herself. Not instantly, not loudly, but clearly. She leaned back slightly, exhaling. If she chose this, it wouldn't just change someone else's life. It would change hers, too, and somewhere across the city. Without knowing it, Lucas had already made his decision. Now, their paths were moving toward each other. The meeting was scheduled for late morning. A neutral office space in Baton Rouge. Clean, professional, nothing personal. Exactly how Lucas preferred it. He arrived early, as always. Lucas sat at the far end of the table, a folder placed neatly in front of him. Every document had already been reviewed. Every detail understood. This wasn't unfamiliar territory for him. A decision had been made. Now it was time to execute it. Still, there was a difference. This wasn't a contract involving numbers. This involved a person. He adjusted his watch slightly, glancing at the door. Right on time. It opened. Zara stepped in. No hesitation, no overthinking, just presence. She took a quick look around the room, then let her eyes settle on Lucas. There was a brief pause, not awkward, not forced, just recognition, because neither of them looked like what the other expected. Lucas had anticipated someone more reserved, more formal, someone who would match the tone of the room. But Zara didn't adjust herself to the space. She entered it as she was, grounded, calm, unbothered by the atmosphere. Zara, on the other hand, noticed something immediately. Lucas looked exactly like someone who controlled everything around him, from the way he sat to the way he observed before speaking. She walked forward and took a seat across from him. No rush, no stiffness. "Hi," she said, offering a small, natural smile. Lucas gave a slight nod. "Thank you for coming." That could have been the tone of the entire meeting. Short, direct, transactional. But Zara glanced around the room again, then leaned back slightly in her chair. "So," she said casually, "is this the part where we both pretend this isn't one of the most unusual introductions ever?" There was a pause, not because the question was inappropriate, but because it wasn't expected. Lucas looked at her for a moment, processing, then, very slightly, his expression shifted. Not a full smile, but close enough to count. "It is an unconventional setting," he replied. Zara nodded. That's one way to put it. The tension in the room adjusted, not completely gone, but no longer rigid. Lucas opened the folder in front of him. "Have you reviewed the details of the process?" he asked. Zara nodded. "I have. Do you have any concerns?" She thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "Not concerns, just awareness." Lucas looked up. "Explain." Zara rested her hands lightly on the table. "This isn't just paperwork," she said. "It's not just timelines and procedures." She held his gaze. "There's a human side to it." Lucas didn't interrupt. Zara continued. "I'm not saying that changes anything," she added. "I just think it matters." Lucas considered her words carefully, not dismissing them, not fully agreeing either. "It will be handled professionally," he said. Zara gave a small smile. "I figured you'd say that." Another brief pause, but this time, it wasn't distant. It was balanced. They moved through the details, medical expectations, schedules, legal structure. Lucas asked precise questions, clear, focused. Zara answered directly, without hesitation, without trying to impress, and that stood out. At one point, Lucas paused mid-sentence. "Why did you decide to do this?" he asked. The question wasn't part of the formal process. Zara noticed that. She leaned back slightly, thinking for a moment, before answering. "Because I wanted to do something that mattered," she said. Lucas watched her closely. "Not just for me," she added. "For someone else." There was no performance in her voice, no attempt to say the right thing, just honesty. Lucas nodded once. That answer stayed with him longer than expected. The meeting continued. But something had already shifted, not in a way either of them would acknowledge, but in a way that changed the tone completely. Toward the end, Zara glanced at the folder in front of him, then back at him. "You plan everything this carefully?" she asked. Lucas didn't hesitate. "Yes." Zara smiled slightly. "Even things like this?" Lucas met her gaze. "Especially things like this." She nodded, then said, lightly, "You know, life doesn't always follow plans like that." Lucas didn't respond immediately, because that wasn't how he operated. But something about the way she said it stayed. The meeting ended the way it began. Calm, controlled. Zara stood. Lucas stood as well. Another brief pause. "Thank you for your time," he said. Zara nodded. "Thank you for the honesty." That wasn't a standard response. Lucas noticed. She turned and walked toward the door, then stopped, looked back at him. "And for the record," she added, "you should probably smile more. It might help." Lucas blinked once. Zara gave a small wave and left. The door closed. The room returned to silence, but it didn't feel the same. Lucas remained standing for a moment longer than necessary, then sat down slowly, not to review documents, not to continue working, just to think, because for the first time since starting this process, He wasn't just considering the outcome. He was thinking about the person. The process began immediately. No delays, no hesitation. Lucas moved forward the same way he handled everything else, with structure. Schedules were confirmed within days, medical evaluations arranged, legal documentation prepared with precision. Every step had a timeline. Every timeline had expectations. For Lucas, that created clarity. For Zara, it created a rhythm she had to step into. The clinic visits were the first stage. Clean environment, controlled procedures, measured conversations. Lucas arrived early each time, always dressed the same, always prepared. Zara arrived on time, never rushed, never trying to match his intensity. The contrast between them became more noticeable in those spaces. At one appointment, Lucas sat upright, reviewing a document on his tablet. His attention fixed, focused. Zara sat beside him, watching the room instead. People moving, voices low, moments happening. After a few minutes, she glanced sideways at him. "You ever look around in places like this?" she asked. Lucas didn't look up. "I focus on what's relevant." Zara nodded slowly. "Right. Of course you do." A brief silence followed. Then she added, "You're missing a lot doing that." That got his attention. Lucas looked at her. "What exactly am I missing?" Zara gestured lightly toward the room. "People," she said. "Different stories. Different reasons for being here." Lucas followed her gaze briefly, then returned his attention to her. "I prefer to focus on outcomes." Zara smiled slightly. "I figured that was the difference." Lucas approached the process like a system. Zara experienced it like a journey. Neither of them said it out loud, but both of them felt it. As the days moved forward, the structure remained intact. Legal meetings took place in quiet offices. Terms were reviewed carefully. Boundaries clearly defined. No emotional involvement. No expectations beyond the agreement. Everything was written, signed, confirmed. Lucas ensured every detail was covered. Every possibility accounted for. Zara read everything thoroughly, not questioning the structure, but understanding what it meant. At one point, she looked up from the document and asked, "Do you ever get tired of needing everything to be this exact?" Lucas met her gaze. "No." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right." She didn't argue, didn't challenge it further, but she understood something in that moment. This wasn't just how he handled situations. This was who he was. The agreement was finalized shortly after. Everything was in place. From the outside, it was perfect. Clear roles, clear expectations, clear outcome, exactly what Lucas wanted. And yet, something didn't sit as firmly as it should have. Not enough to disrupt the process, not enough to question the decision, but enough to notice. It showed up in small ways, like the extra second he took before ending conversations, or the way Zara would pause before leaving, as if something was left unsaid. Nothing direct, nothing obvious, but present. At another appointment, the doctor explained the next stage of the process in detail. Zara listened carefully, nodding, following every word. Lucas, on the other hand, asked multiple follow-up questions. Precise, technical. Zara looked at him after the third question. "You know I'm the one doing this part, right?" she said lightly. Lucas didn't react immediately, then replied, "I'm ensuring everything proceeds correctly." Zara shook her head with a quiet laugh. "No," she said, "you're making it more complicated than it needs to be." Lucas paused. Then, for a brief moment, he considered that. Not dismissed, not ignored. Considered. That was new. The process continued, step by step, exactly as planned, but beneath the structure, something was beginning to form, not defined, not acknowledged, just there. In the way conversations lasted a little longer, in the way silence between them felt less distant, in the way neither of them rushed to leave anymore. It didn't change the agreement, but it changed the space around it. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. At this point, would you keep this strictly business, or would you feel something too? Comment below. The clinic visits became routine, but not predictable. Appointments were scheduled weeks ahead. Same location, same process, same quiet atmosphere. But something about those visits started to feel different. Lucas still arrived early. That hadn't changed. He sat in the same chair each time, back straight, hands either resting on his tablet or folded neatly, prepared, always prepared. Zara noticed that on the third visit, she walked in, saw him already seated, and shook her head slightly. "You ever try being late just once?" she asked, dropping into the chair beside him. Lucas didn't look up immediately. "No." Zara leaned back. "Not even 5 minutes?" Lucas glanced at her. "If something is scheduled, it should be respected." Zara nodded slowly. "Right, of course. Respect the schedule." She paused, then added, "Do you schedule your thoughts too, or do they just follow orders?" Lucas looked at her fully this time. That question didn't fit into his usual categories. "I don't see how that's relevant," he said. Zara smiled slightly. "It's not. I just wanted to see if you'd answer it." Then, unexpectedly, Lucas said, "They don't follow orders." Zara raised an eyebrow. "Honest answer?" "Yes." She nodded once. "Progress." That word stayed in the air for a second. Lucas didn't respond, but something about the exchange shifted the tone between them. Not formal, not distant, just easier. A nurse called Zara's name shortly after. She stood up, then looked back at Lucas. "You coming, or are you going to review more documents while I do all the work?" she asked. Lucas stood. "I'm coming." That was new. Before, he would have waited, observed, stayed detached. Now, he followed. Inside the consultation room, the doctor began explaining the next stage. Clear, direct. Zara listened closely, nodding occasionally. Lucas listened too, but differently. He watched details, measured tone, analyzed information, until Zara lightly tapped his arm. "Relax," she whispered. Lucas glanced at her. "I am relaxed." Zara smiled. "That's your relaxed?" Lucas didn't answer, because for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure. After the appointment, they stepped back into the hallway. Zara stretched slightly. "That wasn't bad," she said. Lucas nodded. "It went as expected." Zara looked at him. "You ever say something didn't go as expected?" Lucas paused, then answered honestly, "Not often." Zara folded her arms loosely. "That sounds exhausting." "It's efficient," Lucas replied. Zara shook her head. "Efficiency isn't everything." Lucas looked at her. That statement, simple as it was, didn't get dismissed, because, lately, he had been noticing that himself. They walked toward the exit together. The automatic doors opened. Warm air met them outside. For a moment, neither of them moved immediately. Zara turned slightly toward him. "You know," she said, "you don't have to treat every step of this like a project." Lucas adjusted his watch slightly. "It is a process." Zara nodded. "I know, but it's also something else." Lucas waited. Zara didn't rush to fill the silence. That was something Lucas had started to notice about her. She didn't force conversations. She let them happen. "It matters," she said finally. Lucas held her gaze for a second longer than usual, then nodded once. "I understand that," he replied. And this time, he meant it, not as a statement, but as something he was beginning to accept. Zara smiled slightly. "Good." They walked toward the parking area. Lucas reached his car first, then paused. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. Zara looked at him, surprised, but not overly. "I'm good," she said, "but thanks." Lucas nodded, then added, "Let me know if that changes." Zara studied him for a second. That wasn't part of the agreement. That wasn't required. "All right," she said. Lucas got into his car, closed the door, but he didn't start the engine immediately, because something small had just happened. And for him, small changes were never random. They meant something. The invitation wasn't planned. It wasn't formal. It wasn't even fully intentional. It happened after another appointment. They had walked out of the clinic like they usually did, side by side. No rush. No strict need to leave immediately. Zara stretched her arms lightly as they reached the parking area. "I'm starving," she said casually. Lucas glanced at her. "You didn't eat before the appointment?" Zara gave him a look. "I wasn't about to sit through all that on a full stomach." Lucas considered that, then asked, Do you have somewhere to go? Zara shrugged. Yeah. Somewhere normal. Lucas paused, then said something that surprised even him. I'll come with you. Zara blinked once, not shocked, just curious. You're serious? She asked. Lucas nodded. Yes. Zara studied him for a moment, then smiled slightly. All right, she said. Let's see how you handle it. The drive didn't take long, but everything around them changed. The streets felt different, less polished, more active. People stood outside talking. Music drifted from somewhere nearby. Cars passed slowly, not in a rush. Lucas noticed everything, not as a problem, not as something to analyze, just different. Zara stepped out of the car first. Lucas followed. This way, she said, walking ahead like she had done it 1,000 times. Because she had. As they moved down the street, people greeted her. Zara, she waved back. Hey, someone called out something from across the road. She responded without breaking her stride. Lucas walked beside her, taking it in. This wasn't like the environments he was used to. No one checked schedules. No one asked about business. People just existed together. They reached a small food spot. Nothing flashy, but full. Voices filled the space. Laughter came from one side of the room. Someone was telling a story loudly enough for half the place to hear. Zara walked in like she belonged there. Lucas followed, more aware of his surroundings. They found a table. Zara sat down, relaxed. Lucas sat across from her, more composed. You look like you're analyzing the furniture, she said. I'm observing, Lucas replied. Zara leaned forward slightly. Same thing, different word. Lucas didn't respond immediately. A server came over. Zara ordered without hesitation, familiar, confident. Lucas took a second longer, then placed his order simply. Once the server left, Zara looked at him again. You've definitely never done this before, she said. Done what? Lucas asked. This, she replied, gesturing lightly around. Just sitting somewhere without a reason. Lucas thought about that, then answered, I usually have a reason. Zara nodded. I figured. A loud burst of laughter came from a nearby table. Someone stood up mid-story, acting something out dramatically. Others joined in, correcting details, adding their own version. Zara laughed. Open, unrestricted. Lucas didn't look at the table. He looked at her. And for a moment, that was enough. The food arrived. Zara immediately started eating. No hesitation. Lucas took a more measured approach. Zara noticed. You can relax, she said. No one's grading you here. Lucas almost responded, but stopped. Then, quietly. And for once, he didn't sound defensive. He sounded aware. They ate for a while. Conversation moved easily, not forced. Zara talked about random things, small moments, stories that didn't need a point. Lucas listened, not because he had to, but because he wanted to understand. At one point, Zara leaned back. So, she said, what do you think? Lucas looked around again. The room, the people, the energy, then answered honestly. It's different. Zara smiled. That's not an answer. Lucas thought for a second longer, then said, it feels real. Zara held his gaze. That answer, she didn't expect. Yeah, she said softly. It is. There was a brief pause, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was shared. Later, as they stepped back outside, the air felt warmer than before. Lucas stood still for a moment, not because he needed to, because he didn't feel the need to rush away. That was new. Zara noticed. You're quiet, she said. Lucas nodded slightly. I'm thinking, about what? She asked. Lucas looked down the street, then back at her. I've spent a lot of time building a life that works, he said. Zara waited. Lucas continued. But I'm starting to realize it might be missing something. Zara didn't interrupt, because she already understood. That happens, she said simply. Lucas let out a small breath. Not frustration, not stress, just recognition. For the first time, he wasn't looking at what he had built. He was noticing what he hadn't. The drive back was quieter than usual, not uncomfortable, not forced, Just different. Lucas kept his eyes on the road, both hands steady on the wheel. Zara sat beside him, relaxed, looking out the window as the streets slowly changed again, from lively corners to structured roads, to the familiar calm of Lucas's side of Baton Rouge. Neither of them rushed to speak, because neither of them needed to fill the silence. That alone was new. A few minutes passed before Zara finally said, "You don't have to drop me all the way." Lucas didn't look at her. "I don't mind." Zara glanced at him. "I didn't say you did." "Then, you're doing more than you need to," she added. Lucas's grip on the wheel adjusted slightly. "I prefer to make sure things are handled properly," he said. Zara smiled faintly. "There it is again." Lucas glanced at her briefly. "What?" "That line you use when you don't want to say what you actually mean." Lucas didn't respond, because this time, she was right. They pulled up near her place. The car slowed, then stopped, but neither of them reached for the door. Zara turned slightly toward him. "You can say it, you know," she said. Lucas looked ahead. "What, exactly?" Zara studied him for a moment, then said, "That you care." The word sat between them, clear, direct, unavoidable. Lucas exhaled slowly, not out of frustration, not out of resistance, out of recognition. "I do," he said. Zara didn't react immediately, because she heard more than just the words. She heard the difference. This wasn't obligation. This wasn't part of the agreement. This was something else. "You didn't have to say that," she said softly. Lucas nodded once. "I know." Zara leaned back slightly, her eyes still on him. "You've changed," she said. Lucas didn't deny it. "I'm trying to understand what's changing," he replied. Zara smiled gently. "That's a start." Silence returned, but now it carried meaning. Lucas finally turned toward her. "For a long time," he said, "everything in my life made sense because it followed a structure." Zara listened fully. "But this," he continued, "doesn't follow anything I'm used to." Zara nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said, "that's how this works." Lucas studied her. "You're not concerned about that?" he asked. Zara thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "I was." Lucas waited. Zara continued. "But I also knew what I was stepping into." She paused. "And I knew it wouldn't stay simple." Lucas looked at her more carefully. "You expected this?" he asked. Zara shook her head slightly. "Not like this," she said, "but I knew something would shift." Lucas leaned back slightly in his seat. That made sense, more than he wanted to admit, because nothing about this had stayed within the lines he created, and yet he hadn't stopped it. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. Zara smiled faintly. "Would you have listened?" Lucas paused, then gave a quiet answer. "Probably not." Zara nodded. "Exactly." They both let that sit for a moment. Then Zara reached for the door, stopped, looked back at him. "You're not as controlled as you think," she said. Lucas raised an eyebrow slightly. Zara continued. "You just haven't been in a situation that made you feel enough to notice." That landed, not as criticism, as truth. Zara opened the door, stepped out, but before closing it, she leaned slightly toward him. "Get used to it," she added, then closed the door gently. Lucas sat there, watching as she walked toward her place. He didn't start the car immediately, because something had shifted again, not in a dramatic way, but in a way that was becoming harder to ignore. For the first time, he wasn't just focused on the outcome of this process. He was paying attention to her, to how she spoke, to how she saw things, to how she made him see things differently. And that was not part of the plan. Lucas finally started the car, but instead of driving immediately, he paused for one last second, as if acknowledging something silently. Then he pulled away. That night, standing once again in his penthouse, the silence returned, but it didn't feel the same, because now he knew what it was missing, and more importantly, he knew who had shown him. If you can feel the shift happening, go ahead and like this video. It tells me you're still with me. Time didn't slow down, but it started to feel different. Weeks passed, then more. The second trimester settled in quietly. Appointments became less tense, more routine, but what surrounded them, That was no longer routine. Lucas noticed it first in his schedule. Meetings that once filled his entire day now had gaps. Not accidental, intentional. He began adjusting things, moving calls, delegating decisions he would normally handle himself, not because he had to, because he wanted to be somewhere else. At the clinic, at check-ins, where Zara was. That shift didn't go unnoticed. During one visit, Zara looked at him as he walked in earlier than expected. "You're early again," she said. Lucas took his usual seat. "I had time." Zara raised an eyebrow slightly. "You always had time," she replied. Lucas didn't answer immediately, because that was true. But before, he chose not to use it this way. Now, he did. The appointment went smoothly. Routine updates, normal progress. But Lucas asked fewer technical questions this time. Instead, he asked something else. "Are you comfortable?" he said. Zara looked at him. That wasn't new, but the way he asked was, "I'm fine," she replied. Lucas nodded, but he didn't return to his usual silence. "Let me know if anything changes," he added. Zara studied him for a moment. "You've said that before," she said. Lucas met her gaze. "I mean it more now." That landed, not heavily, but clearly. Zara looked away briefly, because she understood what that meant, even if neither of them defined it. Outside the clinic, they walked slower than usual. No rush, no immediate reason to separate. Zara glanced at him. "You've been showing up a lot more," she said. Lucas adjusted his watch slightly. "I want to stay informed," he replied. Zara smiled faintly. "That's one way to explain it." Lucas looked at her. "You don't believe that?" he asked. Zara shrugged lightly. "I think that's part of it." Lucas didn't push further, because deep down, he knew she was right. The changes followed him back home. The penthouse hadn't changed. Still quiet, still precise. But Lucas no longer moved through it the same way. He didn't go straight to the window anymore. He sat down, sometimes without turning anything on, thinking, not about business, about moments, things Zara had said, the way she approached situations without overthinking them, the way she didn't try to control outcomes. That unsettled him, not because it was wrong, because it was unfamiliar. One evening, his phone buzzed. A message. "Zara, short, simple, appointment moved to earlier tomorrow." Lucas stared at it for a second longer than necessary, then replied, "I'll be there." He didn't need to say that, but he did. The next day, he arrived before her. When Zara walked in, she noticed immediately. "You really don't miss anything, do you?" she said. Lucas stood. "Not if I can avoid it." Zara shook her head slightly, but she didn't argue, because part of her was starting to expect it. As the weeks progressed, the distance between them changed, not physically, but in the way they interacted. Conversations lasted longer. Silences didn't feel like gaps anymore. They felt shared, but with that came something else. Questions. Lucas felt it late at night, when everything slowed down, when there were no distractions left. He would sit there, thinking about how far this had gone from what he originally planned. This was supposed to be simple, defined, controlled. Now, it wasn't, and he didn't know how to manage that. Zara felt it too, not in the same way, but just as clearly. She noticed how Lucas looked at her differently, more present, more aware, and that created a different kind of tension, because she understood boundaries. She entered this knowing exactly what it was. But now, those lines were not as clear as they used to be. One afternoon, after another checkup, Zara paused before getting into her car. She looked at Lucas. "You ever think about where this is going?" she asked. Lucas didn't answer immediately, because he had, more than once, but every time he reached that point, he stopped. "I think about what needs to be done next," he said. Zara nodded slowly. "That's not what I asked." Lucas held her gaze. For a moment, he didn't have a response ready, and that was becoming more frequent. Zara opened her car door, then paused. "Just don't ignore it," she said. Lucas frowned slightly. "Ignore what?" Zara looked at him, then said quietly, "What's changing?" She got into the car, closed the door. Lucas stood there for a moment, because now he couldn't pretend he didn't know what she meant. The question Zara asked didn't leave. Lucas carried it with him, into meetings, into quiet moments, into spaces where he used to think clearly. Now, his thoughts didn't follow structure the way they used to. They paused, returned, shifted direction, and every time, they led back to the same place. Her. A few days passed before they saw each other again. Another scheduled appointment. Lucas arrived early, as usual, but this time, he wasn't reviewing anything. No tablet, no documents, just sitting, waiting. That alone was different. When Zara walked in, she noticed immediately. "You look like you're thinking," she said, taking her seat beside him. Lucas glanced at her briefly. "I am." Zara leaned back slightly. "That serious?" Lucas didn't respond right away, because he wasn't used to saying things before he fully understood them, and right now, he didn't. The nurse called Zara's name. They stood, walked in together. The appointment itself was routine. Progress updates, everything moving as expected, but neither of them focused on that fully, because something else was sitting between them, unspoken, but clear. After it ended, they stepped outside. The air was warmer than usual. Zara stopped walking. Lucas took another step, then noticed. He turned back. "What is it?" he asked. Zara looked at him, not casually this time, direct. "This isn't just business anymore, is it?" She said. There it was, no space to avoid it, no way to redirect it. Lucas didn't answer, not immediately, because every instinct in him told him to respond carefully, to choose something controlled, something safe, but none of those answers felt right. So, instead, he stayed silent. Zara didn't interrupt. She didn't repeat the question. She just waited, and that made it harder, because silence, when it's shared like that, demands honesty. Lucas looked away briefly, toward the street, then back at her. Still, no answer. Zara exhaled slowly. "That's what I thought," she said. Her tone wasn't accusing, just certain. Lucas frowned slightly. "That's not what this is supposed to be," he said. Zara nodded. "I know." Another pause. Lucas continued. "It was structured for a reason." Zara held his gaze. "And what happens when it stops feeling like that?" Lucas didn't respond, because that question didn't have a clear answer, and he didn't like that. "I don't operate well in situations without clarity," he said finally. Zara gave a small nod. "I figured." Then she stepped closer, not aggressively, just enough to make the moment more real. "But this isn't something you can organize into a system," she said. Lucas met her eyes. That was exactly the problem, because everything in his life had always fit into something structured. This didn't, and it was starting to affect him more than he expected. Zara watched him carefully. "You don't have to figure it out right now," she added. Lucas let out a quiet breath. "That's not how I work," he said. Zara almost smiled. "I know," she said. "That's why this is difficult for you." Lucas didn't argue, because it was true. They stood there for a moment longer, neither moving, neither stepping away, because once something like this is said, you can't go back to how things were. You either move forward or pretend it didn't happen, and neither of them was pretending. Zara stepped back slightly, her voice softer now. "I just needed to know if you saw it too," she said. Lucas looked at her. He did. He just didn't know what to do with it. "I see it," he said. Zara nodded once. That was enough. Not a solution, not a decision, but acknowledgement. And sometimes, that's where everything begins to change. Zara turned toward her car. Lucas stayed where he was, watching her for a second longer than necessary, because now, there was no distance left in what they were experiencing. Only uncertainty. And for Lucas, that was unfamiliar territory. The days after that conversation didn't feel normal, not because anything dramatic happened, but because something had already been said, and neither of them could step back from it. Lucas tried to return to his routine. Meetings resumed. Decisions continued. Calls filled his schedule again. But the structure he relied on didn't hold the same weight. He found himself pausing in the middle of conversations, not long enough for others to notice, but long enough for him to feel it, because his thoughts were no longer fully in one place. They moved, Back to the clinic, back to the parking lot, back to Zara. He didn't like that. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't controlled, and that made it unfamiliar. Zara handled it differently. She didn't try to ignore what had happened, but she didn't push it either. She gave it space, because she understood something Lucas didn't yet. Some things don't need to be forced. They need to be faced. The next time they saw each other, there was no build-up. Just another appointment. Same place, same time, but not the same energy. Lucas was already there. Standing this time, not sitting. Zara walked in and noticed immediately. "You've been waiting long?" she asked. Lucas shook his head. "No," she nodded. Then they both paused, because the conversation they had avoided was still there, unfinished. The nurse called Zara in. They followed. The appointment moved forward. Routine updates, everything progressing as expected, but neither of them focused on it fully, because something else needed to be said. Afterward, they didn't walk out immediately. Zara stayed seated for a moment. Lucas stood nearby. Then she looked up at him. "You're still thinking about it," she said. Lucas didn't deny it. "Yes." Zara nodded slowly. "Good," she said. Lucas frowned slightly. "That's not usually considered a good thing," he replied. Zara smiled faintly. "It is when you stop avoiding it." Lucas took a step closer. Not rushed, not calculated, just direct. "I don't know how to do this," he said. The words came out before he could refine them, before he could adjust them into something more controlled, and that made them real. Zara looked at him carefully. "Do what?" she asked. Lucas exhaled slowly. "This," he said. He gestured slightly between them. "What this has become." Zara didn't interrupt. Lucas continued. "I understand structure. I understand process. I understand outcomes." He paused. "But this..." He stopped for a second, searching for the right words, then said it clearly. "I don't know how to feel this much, and not know where it leads." Silence followed, not heavy, but full. Zara stood up slowly. Now they were face to face. "You're not supposed to know," she said. Lucas looked at her. "That doesn't make sense to me," he replied. Zara smiled slightly. "I know." She stepped a little closer. "That's because you've spent your whole life making sure everything makes sense before you move forward." Lucas didn't argue, because she was right. Zara held his gaze. "But this isn't like that," she said. Lucas remained still. "Then what is it?" he asked. Zara's expression softened. "It's real," she said. A brief pause. Then she added, "Welcome to being human." Lucas let out a quiet breath. Not frustration, not resistance. Something closer to acceptance. Because for the first time, he wasn't trying to control what he felt. He was acknowledging it. And that changed everything. They stood there for a moment longer, not speaking, because nothing needed to be added. What was said was enough. When they finally walked out, the air felt different. Not lighter, just clearer. Lucas walked beside Zara, not ahead, not behind. Beside. That was new. At her car, she turned to him. "You're going to be okay," she said. Lucas looked at her. "That's not what concerns me," he replied. Zara tilted her head slightly. "Then what does?" she asked. Lucas held her gaze. Not knowing what happens next, he said. Zara smiled gently. "You'll figure it out," she said. Lucas didn't respond immediately, because for once, he wasn't trying to. Zara got into her car. Lucas stepped back, watching, not out of habit, but because he wanted to. As she drove away, Lucas stood there for a moment longer, because something had just shifted again, not in uncertainty, but in clarity. He didn't have answers, but he finally understood the question, and that was enough. For now, the call came earlier than expected. Lucas was in the middle of a meeting, voices around him, numbers on a screen, someone explaining projections that normally would have his full attention. His phone vibrated. He glanced down. Zara. That alone was enough. He didn't wait, didn't excuse himself properly, didn't finish the conversation. He stood, picked up his phone, and walked out. That was the first time anyone in that room had ever seen him leave something unfinished. The drive felt longer than it was. Every light slower, every second louder. Lucas kept his focus on the road, but his mind wasn't calculating anything. Just one thought: get there. When he arrived, the hospital was already in motion. He moved quickly through the entrance, past the front desk, following directions without needing to ask twice. Everything around him felt active: voices, movement, urgency, and for once, he didn't try to control any of it. When he stepped into the room, he stopped. Zara was there, lying back, focused, breathing steady but intense. And in that moment, everything else disappeared. No business, no structure, no plan. Just this. Lucas moved closer, not rushed, but drawn. Zara glanced at him briefly. "You made it," she said, her voice controlled despite everything happening. Lucas nodded. "I'm here." That was all he needed to say. He stayed beside her, not speaking unless necessary, not interrupting, just present, completely. Time moved differently in that room. Minutes stretched. Moments held weight. Lucas watched everything, not analyzing, not measuring, feeling every shift in Zara's expression, every breath she took, every moment she pushed through something he couldn't fully understand, but respected completely. At one point, she looked at him again. "You're quieter than usual," she said. Lucas didn't look away. "I'm not thinking about anything else," he replied. Zara gave the smallest nod. That mattered. The room filled with instructions, voices guiding, encouraging, and Lucas stayed right there, not stepping back, not creating distance, closer than he had ever been to anything that mattered this much. Then, everything shifted. The moment came, the room tightened, then opened again, and suddenly, there was a sound, small, new, a cry. Lucas didn't move at first, not because he couldn't, but because the moment held him there. The child was placed carefully in Zara's arms, and everything slowed, not in time, but in feeling. Lucas stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the child, then on Zara, and in that moment, there was no separation between what this was supposed to be and what it had become. Zara held the baby gently, carefully, like it meant everything. Lucas looked at them both, and something inside him settled into place. Not confusion, not uncertainty, clarity, a kind he had never experienced before, because this wasn't a result. It was a moment, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about what came next. He was fully inside what was happening now. The child made another small sound. Zara adjusted her hold instinctively. Lucas watched that closely, because nothing about that moment felt distant. It felt connected, real, and undeniable. He didn't say anything, because there were no words that could match what was happening, only presence. And for once, that was enough. The room didn't return to normal, even as the movement slowed, even as voices softened, even as everything that needed to be done was done. Something remained, a stillness that carried weight. Zara sat back slightly, the child resting in her arms. Her breathing had steadied, but her focus hadn't shifted. Lucas stood beside her, not moving, not speaking, because stepping away felt wrong. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to control what happened next. He just stayed, watching. The child moved slightly, a small, natural reaction. Zara adjusted her hold without thinking. That instinct, Lucas noticed it immediately, not as an observation, as something that held meaning, because there was nothing forced about it, nothing calculated, just care, pure, unfiltered. Zara looked down at the child for a moment longer, then slowly, she lifted her eyes and looked at Lucas. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't said yet, everything they had avoided defining, everything that no longer fit into what this was supposed to be. Lucas held her gaze, not guarded, not distant, just present. Zara shifted slightly, her expression soft, but serious. "This is where things were supposed to go back to normal, right?" she said. There it was, the question neither of them could avoid anymore, the line that separated what had been planned from what had actually happened. Lucas didn't answer immediately, because the version of him from before would have known exactly what to say. Something clear, structured, safe. But that version of him was no longer standing in that room. Now, there was hesitation, not from uncertainty alone, but from honesty. He looked at the child, then back at Zara, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. No expectations, no agreements, no defined outcome, just one decision. What was he willing to admit? Zara watched him closely, not impatient, not pushing, just waiting, because she already understood something important. This wasn't just his answer. It was a choice. Lucas exhaled slowly, not to delay, but to be certain that what he said next was real, because once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. I don't think I want normal anymore. The words settled between them, not loud, not dramatic, but final. Zara's expression shifted slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition, because she had felt it too. Every moment leading up to this, every conversation, every pause, every look that lasted longer than it should have. She lowered her gaze briefly, back to the child, then returned it to Lucas. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. Lucas didn't respond right away, because for the first time, he wasn't trying to define something completely before speaking. He was allowing himself to stand inside it. "I don't have the full answer yet," he said. Zara listened. "But I know it's not what this was supposed to be," he added. Another pause, but this one felt different. Not heavy, open. Zara nodded slowly, because she understood that better than he realized. The child shifted again, a small movement. Zara adjusted gently. Lucas watched that once more, and this time, he didn't look away, because now, he wasn't thinking about where things would return to. He was thinking about where they could go. The room remained quiet, not empty, not uncertain, just open. Lucas stood there, looking at Zara and the child. Everything he had built his life on, structure, clarity, control, had brought him to this moment. But this moment was asking something different from him, not a decision based on logic, a choice based on truth. Zara watched him carefully. She wasn't expecting a perfect answer. She wasn't expecting a defined plan, but she knew whatever he said next would matter. Lucas took a step closer, not calculated, not measured, certain. "I came into this thinking I needed a child to fill a space in my life," he said, his voice steady. Zara held his gaze. Lucas continued, "I thought that would be enough." A brief pause. Then he added, "But I was wrong." Zara's expression softened slightly, not surprised, because she had seen that shift happen. Lucas looked at her, fully, not as part of an agreement, not as someone connected to a process, as someone who had changed him. "What I found," he said, then paused for just a second, "was you." The words settled gently. No force, no pressure, just truth. Zara didn't respond immediately, not because she didn't understand, but because she felt the weight of it. Everything they had gone through, every moment that built up to this, it was all there, and now it had a direction. She looked down briefly at the child, then back at Lucas. "You didn't plan that," she said softly. Lucas gave a small, honest shake of his head. "No." Zara smiled faintly. "Good," she replied, "because if he had, it wouldn't have meant the same." Another quiet moment passed, but this one felt complete, not because everything was figured out, but because they had both chosen to face it together. Time moved forward, not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily. Lucas's penthouse didn't stay the same. It couldn't. The silence that once filled every space was replaced, not all at once, but gradually. There were new sounds now. Movement, voices, life, things out of place, things not arranged perfectly. And for the first time, Lucas didn't fix them immediately, because they weren't problems. They were signs of something real. Zara didn't lose her world. She didn't leave behind what made her who she was. She brought it with her, her presence, her way of seeing things, her ability to exist without needing everything to be controlled. And that changed the space around Lucas, not by replacing it, but by adding something it never had before. One evening, they sat together. No rush, no agenda. The city stretched out beyond the windows. But this time, Lucas wasn't focused on it. Zara looked around the room, then back at him. You know, this place finally feels different, she said. Lucas followed her gaze, then looked back at her. I had the space, he said. Then he added, I just didn't have the right people. Zara smiled. Now, you do. Lucas didn't respond with words. He didn't need to, because for the first time, everything that mattered was already there. If this story moved you even a little, subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us what really matters.